Progress in Action. I am Matt Stewick. I have my normal co-host, Sara. Hello, Sara, sister. How are you, sister Sara? What's happening?
Great. Hello, everybody.
Well, Mike, do you mind if I do start with you, almost treating this like a Bill Gates interview, because I'm sort of fascinated how someone gets into a cause like this and he's so passionate. And let me just tell you that I admire your work and have, I haven't really been involved. So if me or Sara happen to misspeak and say a wrong word, obviously we don't know nearly as much as you. And again, we're trying to reach out to lay people who may not. This is a really complex area, and I know that you have a lot of knowledge, and so if we can make it more palatable for our listeners, and if we misspeak, please jump in and say you're not saying that right. So you become an environmental or an energy justice warrior at what age, and what makes you first begin this quest, this journey that you're on?
Sure. So I got involved as a sophomore in high school. They started in Earth Day. They started an environmental group around Earth Day when I was in 10th grade, and I got involved in that, spent the first year and a half doing the typical ineffective pretend we're recycling kind of thing, but didn't actually know how to arrange to make it get collected to get recycled once it hit the dumpster. And did Earth Day concerts and my thrash metal band at the time, which might surprise you. We played in the Battle of the Bands and raised money for Earth Day, and then the school stole it and didn't go anywhere. So after a year and a half of being totally ineffective, got pulled into a fight against a trash incinerator that was proposed for my hometown initially, but it was just kicked out and was planned a few towns away. And we fought that. We won a lot of victories along the way, stopped most of their waste contracts in my home county near Philadelphia, but ultimately they got built once Philadelphia signed a contract with them, and it is now the largest air polluter in my home county. So I've never stopped fighting that company, fighting that industry.
Can you say that company's name?
Yeah, so that company is Wheelabrator. They used to be a subsidiary of Waste Management Incorporated, the largest waste corporation in the world, but they've changed hands a couple times since 2014. But we have been having a lot more success recently in Baltimore, where they have an even bigger trash incinerator that's the largest air polluter in that city. And a law that I wrote called the Baltimore Clean Air Act was passed unanimously by City Council in February 2019. It's been in the courts because the industry sued over it, but it actually got struck down in federal court last month, and we've been urging the city to appeal, and they just agreed to do that. We had to do a die-in. We had about 25, 30 of us break quarantine during the pandemic, go in front of the incinerator with masks on, socially distanced, lie down and play dead, and got that image in the media. And right after walking back from that protest, I got the text that says the city's appealing. So we won that little hurdle in the battle to make sure that the local governments all throughout Maryland retain the right to have local clean air laws, so that Baltimore can do something like this that'll force the closure of their biggest polluter and of another incinerator that's the largest medical waste one in the country, also would be shut down because they won't comply with modern emissions requirements. And this is a tactic we've used in several places in Pennsylvania and also recently in New York, in local communities to stop polluters with local ordinances.
Okay, so 30 years of you being involved in the movement. You got involved because of Earth Day. Earth Day drew you in, am I correct? That was the first thing that sort of woke you up, so to speak?
Yeah.
Now, the founder of that is Dennis Hayes, correct?
Yeah.
So what is our opinion on Dennis Hayes? Good man, bad man? Not sure. How do we feel about Dennis Hayes?
I know very little about Dennis Hayes, other than that in the first Earth Day, when I wasn't even alive yet, I heard that he gave a fiery speech where he talked about how we're not going to let these corporations turn the movement into a pick up after their litter movement. And here we are decades later where they've succeeded in that. And let me give you a little, this might seem like a tangent, it'll take 5 minutes, but I'm going to go through and kind of paint a picture here because it ties into this whole crux of what story is told and not told in this film as well. So the story starts when I was an undergrad at Penn State University, and I saw a pickup truck that had 2 stickers on it. One was some kind of pro-logging sticker, like "Have you hugged a logger today?" is what it said. And the other sticker had only 3 words on it. It said, "Smokey needs you." And I was blown away by the fact that both of these stickers could be on the same truck, but more importantly, how that second sticker in black and white letters didn't have the message on it. Now, what does that mean? Smokey needs you. Like, who is Smokey? You can answer if you want, but the audience can hear it. But so Smokey is this bear, right, that wants us to do something. And
Yes.
so I was fascinated about how they didn't have to print the bear on the sticker.
That's right.
The advertising campaign was so effective that sticker was a key to unlock a message that was already in my head since I was really little.
Yep.
And it made me think, who funds Smokey the Bear? Now, when I looked into it, I found out Smokey the Bear is funded by the same entity that puts out things that say, don't drink and drive, tutor kids after school, wear a seatbelt, wear a condom, print on two sides of a paper, pick up your litter, all these seemingly good messages, right? Now, who puts this out is an entity called the Ad Council. And whenever I present this, most of the time, people don't even know the punchline. That's the Ad Council. They're just like, who? And then you say the Ad Council, and people are like, oh yeah, I kind of remember seeing that. They brag that on average in this country, people see 400 impressions per year of their ads. That's more than once a day you're seeing an Ad Council ad somewhere in some medium, because they're in every medium. Now, what are they saying? What is their message between all those threads? What is Smokey the Bear's exact message, word for word?
You can prevent forest fires.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
That's right. Yep.
Now, what is the key word in that sentence?
You, only you.
You.
Mm-hmm.
The Ad Council, when I looked into who funds them, when I looked at, well, first of all, my first clue was in 1994. I saw a full-page ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer and said, now word of thanks to our sponsors, thanks. And had that block logo, the Ad Council in the middle, and the backdrop with all this small print of all these giant corporations that funded them. And you had Walmart and McDonald's and Weyerhaeuser and all kinds of companies. And when you look into it, it's like, this is corporate America. Literally, when I wrote this piece called Occupy Earth Day back in 2015 or so, if you look up corporations.org/occupyearthday.html, you'll get there. I found exactly half of the top 100 companies in the US are funding the Ad Council in recent years. Now, what are they saying? What is the common thread between all those messages? It's that word you. They actually have as one of their criteria on whether they'll do an advertising campaign that it has to have an individual change focus. It has to point at you and say, you're the cause of social problems. Therefore, your individual action is the solution to social problems. Don't do what the students and community activists did when they teamed up in the late 80s and early 90s and mailed back those styrofoam clamshells to Oak Brook, Illinois, to McDonald's corporate headquarters until they stopped using them. That's why McDonald's funds the Ad Council. That's why McDonald's also funds Keep America Beautiful, a little mini Ad Council for litter issues, which is funded by the waste and packaging industries and litter producers like tobacco companies and Pepsi and Coca-Cola and McDonald's. They are a blame shifting tactic that say, don't look at the wizard behind the curtain. Most people don't even see the curtain of Ad Council, but no one knows who's behind them. Don't blame them for social problems because you're the cause. You pick up our litter. And Dennis Hayes was the one calling that out in 1970, saying they're trying to turn our movement into a pick up their litter movement, and we're not going to let it happen. And here we are 50 years later, and it's happened hugely. Mm-hmm. The entry points for this movement are picking up litter and voluntary recycling and not institutionalizing it. It's adopting a cow and renting a whale and all those silly things that people do that prevent them from working for institutional level change. And I'll drill a little deeper in this. So we all know about Occupy, and they frame things brilliantly in talking about the 1% versus the bottom 99%, and how that 1% stays in power is they divide people. And I learned when I was an undergrad at Penn State, one of the good teachers I had was Sam Richards for a race and ethnic relations class. And he had us read a book called A Different Mirror, A Multicultural History of the United States. And it talked about the plantations in the South and how they literally, very deliberately divided their workforce by race. They would bring in different races or ethnicities of people so they can pay one less than the other and get them resenting each other to fight each other so they wouldn't organize against their plantation owners. In Hawaii, on the sugar plantations, it was so deliberate. The plantation owners were sending memos to each other saying, have this percentage of Filipinos and this percentage of Japanese and situate them like this. And they lived on hills. And I think the expression, the shit rolls downhill, came from that social engineering because they had no sewer systems and one group was literally shitting on the other. And they socially engineered that to prevent the labor organizing in those sugar plantations. And so this is the history, it's baked into the history of this country, that the people in power stay in power by using racism, sexism, heterosexism, wedge issues like guns and abortion, sports, religion, Democrat and Republican political parties. Every way we can cut people up, even class. They will get the middle class hating the poor. That's totally sanctioned to organize along class lines, and especially against immigrants. But it's so dangerous when you start talking about the 1% versus the bottom 99% that Obama's FBI has to coordinate crackdowns on Occupy camps. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking at. The Ad Council is the scientific perfection of this divide and conquer strategy, where they're dividing us not even into group identities, but into individuals, where we start thinking of, we just have to focus on ourselves. And this film plays into that by talking about there's no solution other than, oh, too many people. Now, I've read the studies about what are the most impactful things individual people can do in terms of individual actions. And yes, not having kids is the number one thing by far. There's no question about that. It's just common sense too. What can an individual do? Not have another individual who's going to do all these other things, right? So it just blows away any other individual action you can do. And that's why we should all stop having kids if we're going to be real about it. And this is the kind of advice that environmental groups are afraid to talk about because it's so personal. It's like talking about the third most effective thing, which is going vegan. Second one is all the energy things. If you lump them all together, it's like travel less, use green energy, that sort of thing. And eating a plant-based diet, as people like to say now, but going vegan is the third most powerful thing you can do to reduce consumption and your carbon footprint on this planet. So it's important to do all these things, especially the not having kids. And yet that and diet issues are the ones that they are most fearful of talking about because they'll lose their funders and they'll lose the public that they're trying to get as donors because these are taboo topics to tell individuals to change. But the most important thing beyond doing those individual change things that we should be doing anyway is to organize for institutional change. And the film said nothing about how we're going to change institutions to make sure we get where we need to go. That could include things like educating women throughout the world so that we get the population control that we need, because that is the best way to deal with that problem. But the population problem, they also screwed up on because it has this tendency, especially when white folks are talking about it, to get criticized for, well, gee, you're just telling brown people to not have kids because we're just looking at the number of people, and that's totally the wrong way to look at it. The population problem is a consumption problem. It's the number of people times how much they're consuming, which means it's the white northern people, the overconsumers, the wealthy people in the US and Europe and also Japan, very energy intensive there and resource intensive. It's these nations and the people in them, especially the wealthier ones, that need to reduce their consumption the most. That's how we're going to tackle the overall consumption issue. We need to tackle population and consumption and be conscious about who is most responsible when we do that.
But what you're saying, and again, we can go off in different directions here, Mike, and this is, something that I recognized once I got politically woke, and I think it's speaking to the same thing that you're talking about, is again, how do we change the culture? How do we stop the messaging? You know, we're this little outfit and you know, trying to educate people. But for us, it's like Facebook is filtered and YouTube is demonetized, and we, you know, we're struggling to, you know, just do any kind of market penetration where we have more viewers, and it's so hard. So you've watched this for years and years and years, and you're fighting against this unbelievable profit motive, which is based in messaging, and it's because they're just trying to continue to fuck people so they can continue to make their money. I don't know how, again, you know, with Sara and my producer and with you, we don't know how to put a fist in the wheel or put something in the wheel to stop this machine from cranking. It seems like it's impossible. And, you know, Sara and Christina know every day I believe I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose my fucking mind. So I don't know how you wake up every day. You've been doing this for years. Like you said, you're still fighting this fight. And I'm in there trying to fight with you, and I'm like, I don't know how we're gonna break through. I have no fucking idea how we're gonna break through. It feels like, again, they're controlling everything. They control YouTube, they control Twitter, they control Facebook, they obviously control the media. You're just even talking about little amazing subliminal messages that they're putting out there that we, if you didn't bring that up, Mike, we're not even gonna fucking discuss it. That they're from a young age. When you first start reading and start to be, they're influencing you to look away almost. You're the problem.
Yeah.
So I mean, first of all, just so I really respect what you're doing. I find it hard to wake up every day to do this. So I don't know how you do it. I'll ask you another direction, because obviously I'm sure you're voracious when it comes to this. If you were to recommend a book, if you were gonna say, because right now you have to understand, for me, I most days I'm like, I should just drink bleach, for God's sakes. I should just check out. I should just start injecting it like Trump tells me to, because I see no way. Someone has to give me hope. I don't see hope. So is there a book that I could read that would inspire me in the environmental movement, that are like, okay, I can do this. I'm pumped up. I'm ready to do this. Is there a book that you look to every once in a while? You're like, all right, I've had it. I'm going to read this book today just to get re-inspired.
Okay, I'm going to answer that differently than you want me to. But my favorite book is not one to look to for hope, but it's one to look for taking off those rose-colored glasses. This book changed my life in a lot of ways, and it gave me a clue about the whole Ad Council thing. And it's called Toxic Sludge is Good for You. The subtitle is Lies, Damn Lies, and the Public Relations Industry. It's written by the Center for Media and Democracy, John Stauber and Sheldon Rampton. And it came out in the mid-90s. They did another book after that called Trust Us, We're Experts, which is more about science for hire, like my school I was talking about. But the thing that amazed me the most is just to understand the propaganda systems that are surrounding us, so that we can really see through all that, because it's hard to survive in this kind of media culture and not be able to tell fact from fiction and be able to unspin the spin. And that book, it opened up with this thing, and I'm dating myself here, but some of you might remember the Dancing Raisins commercial when that first came out. And it was a big deal because it was the first time they used claymation. And so they got free media coverage just for having ads that were done in a different way. And so they got news coverage of their ads, which was free advertising. But what blew me away, made me feel so abused just reading the intro to that book, was that those dancing raisins, which my mom and dad said, oh, Mikey, check this out, these cool, cute things on TV. My childhood was corrupted by the fact that that was a public relations campaign by the grape industry that was fighting the United Farm Workers in California over a grape boycott. And it was designed to distract me from something that I didn't even have a prayer of knowing about that. But those dancing raisins were there to make sure that I felt good about raisins and eating that, while laborers of color getting sprayed toxic pesticides in the farm fields were getting screwed over by that industry.
Wow.
And so that hit me so hard. And then to read every chapter talking about different industry, from sewage sludge to nuclear power to biotech, and to see how, to even the Iraq War and how that was sold to us through a public relations company, and lies about babies being taken out of incubators in Kuwait by Iraqi soldiers, which never ever happened. It's just, it was amazing to see, and to then be able to go out throughout my life and understand that I can't take things at face value. Do the research and make sure to really understand what's going on when I hear about stuff.
I think too, to answer Matt too, I think what gives me hope is seeing somebody like you who is fighting, who, you know, fights these battles, and more people like you, maybe possibly in the millennial generation, who are going to be fighting, who care about stuff like this, because it does matter. It does matter. And so, you know, you're giving people a voice, and that's what gives me hope.
Let me try to date you a little bit, Mike. When did you have your thrash metal band? What year was that?
That was late 80s, early 90s.
And what was the name of your thrash metal band?
Yeah, you won't find them on YouTube. It was called Catalyst, which then became my license plate, then became my email address for a long time. And now it's just.
What did you play? Did you say what's your?
Play guitar and a keyboard later.
Sweet. So you're in a thrash metal band in high school, and at the same time you're trying to be an activist, right? So now you leave high school and you go to college. What college did you go to, and did you again go there with an environmental, you know, trajectory as far as your career is concerned, or were you just going to college?
Well, that's a great question, actually, because I ended up kind of by default going to Pennsylvania State University, only because my mom worked there and both my parents went there and I got discounts, so it was just the default place to go. But I learned throughout that experience that colleges and universities are often taking corporate military funding, and I found out that my school was, at the time, the second largest in corporate funded research of all universities in the country, and fourth in military funded research, which explains a lot of the things I found out about them, like why they were promoting the multi-state nuclear waste dump that I was fighting and we ultimately stopped, why they were promoting many other things that we fought, including nuclear power, including sewage sludge dumping on farm fields, logging, mining, fracking, every bad thing you can think of, biotech. They promoted bovine growth hormone. I protested that. All kinds of animal testing, military toxic waste sites on campus, you name it. You can go down the list and there's just every bad thing you can imagine that school is involved in. And so that kind of got me plugged in to working and helping build student anti-corporate movements to expose the connection between corporate control of universities and how that is influencing education, and actually co-founded what we call the 180, the movement for democracy in education, which was active for several years, working on that.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the college again?
So Pennsylvania State University, or Penn State.
Oh, wow.
So I went there, and then
it was Penn State that did this?
Yeah, yeah, they're known for their football and for their pedophilia in more recent years, but well before the whole pedophilia scandal, I would consider them the root of much evil, given how many things they're tied into that are corporate military projects that are doing harm to communities.
So you had mentioned that secondary project of making sure that you guys could like stop the schools and the corporate funding. Is that still active today?
No, unfortunately, that group died out. Some of the several student movement groups I was active in, including helping found some, are not really around anymore.
It just sounds so appropriate to have that.
Oh, it's so needed. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
So Penn State, and what are you majoring in at Penn State at that time?
So I actually avoided a major for a long time because I learned pretty early that people who go into environmental majors, that they're really anti-environmental majors, that they're really training the people that I end up fighting. And so a lot of people go in with good intentions and end up racking up debt in college and realizing that there are 3 job markets for people who have environmental degrees coming out of college. They can either work for the polluters themselves and basically help them dodge environmental laws, or they can work for the government agencies that are captive to those polluters through campaign contributions and revolving doors that ensure that those agencies are basically protecting corporations against the public. And that's not always that fruitful either. Or they can work for the environmental consultants that I would basically call scientific prostitutes in a lot of cases. They basically consult for industries that are trying to pollute or that are polluting and help them get away with doing that. There's actually, I'll just tell a joke relating to this. It's the best way to really explain it. But what's the difference between a philosopher, a mathematician, and an environmental consultant? And the answer is, if you ask a mathematician, what is 2 plus 2 equal? They'll say it equals 4. If you ask a philosopher, they'll say, well, it depends on your definition of 2, 4, plus, and equals. If you ask an environmental consultant, they'll come back to you and say, what do you want it to equal?
Very true.
Sadly, that's so true in so many cases, because it's like the free market applied to environmental answers. And so if a company has a consultant that says, well, here's the real answer, and the company doesn't like that, they don't get hired again. And we've seen that happen when companies, for example, in my home county, Waste Management, the company I mentioned, the parent company of the incinerator, also has 4 landfills there in my home county. And one of them, when I was first getting involved, was exposed to have radiation leaking into the groundwater above safe legal limits. And that was in the state's files, but the state wasn't doing anything about it. It took volunteers looking through their files to find this. What did they do? Well, the state and the company, within 24 hours of this being exposed, were on the same page in the media saying, oh, that's just a natural formation from the Triassic period, which they had no way of knowing and had made no sense. So what they did is they changed the consulting company and the problem went away. And there are other consulting companies in Pennsylvania that I've known where they've been busted by the state for coming up with test data for things they don't even have the equipment to test. That's how corrupt it can get. So that's just a reality of this.
So you're saying you didn't have a major, but you had, when you left college, you had a major.
So, okay, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
keeping your focus. You're
so I was
fine.
avoiding environmental majors for a while. I ended up falling into sociology after avoiding as long as I could. My minor was in science, technology, and society, which is more multidisciplinary, and I did my honors in that.
And so you're at Penn State, and then you go to law school?
Yeah, I went to law school many years later. Didn't realize I was going to do that. I was avoiding law school because of the cost, because of the time it would take, and because of the tendencies of law schools to teach you things like, well, when you work for Exxon, here's what you do. And I know I'm not working for Exxon, so how would I survive in that environment? And then I saw an email that in all caps in the subject line said, tuition-free law school for activists. And my jaw hit the floor. And then I realized, okay, I'd have to try this out. And so I moved away from Philadelphia to DC, to the University of DC, which is an activist-run law school, used to be anti-art school law. And I'm so glad that I did. So I did that several years later, and I've been a lawyer barred in Pennsylvania since 2011. The movement of work, the work that I do is mostly one community at a time, helping them stop some bad project that would screw them, whether it's an incinerator or biomass plant or natural gas power plant or whatever it is. And what people think mistakenly is that all we're doing is pushing things from one community to another. We're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and we're just pushing things out of privileged communities into less privileged communities. And sometimes that happens. But what happens most of the time is that we stop them one place and they give up.
Yep.
Or we stop them in one place and we chase them down in as many as 6 other places and stop them every time. And that is happening so many times that the aggregate numbers across the past several decades of proposals for dirty energy and waste facilities is that we're stopping between about 50% and high 99 point something percent of each industrial wave of development, one plant at a time. We are reshaping entire sectors of the economy, one community at a time, by networking communities with each other, having them help each other. So if we stop them once, we stop them again, and everyone learns from each other, and we stop them everywhere. And that is creating the change that the big greens, the groups focusing on fossil fuel divestment, are not creating that change on the ground.
That's right.
The groups like Natural Resources Defense Council and Sierra Club and other groups that are lobbying in DC are not making that kind of impact because they're not doing that work on the ground. Sierra Club is more than others, but
And I would prefer to put my money into you guys. You know, I would prefer to give my money to you guys rather than.
But you can donate to Mike. You can go right to his Facebook page right now and donate to Energy Justice Network.
And I will, because I would prefer to give my money to somebody that I know is doing something rather than, you know, some of these organizations where you wonder how much of it is actually going to change something.
Yeah, if they can afford to send you mailers with calendars and stickers and anything, actually send you any mailer, with rare exception, they probably have more money than they ought to for the kind of work that they're doing, and they don't need your money. There are groups like mine that will never afford mailers, that can barely afford the time to advertise and say, yay, we won something before we're on to the next fight. And that's one of our big problems, that we do so little social media and communicating because we're so busy every day answering calls from Honolulu to Albany to all over the place. Those are just two recent examples, but communities all over the country that are on the front lines fighting things, saying, help me, help me, help me, and we're helping them. And we don't have time to spend all of our time making cool memes about it because we're just doing the work, getting it done, and a lot of communities are winning because of it.
You guys are actually on the ground doing it, and that's where it's like, anytime, you know, you guys do have the opportunity, we can have you on again. You know, if we could, I would love that, because we do need to keep on getting the word out there.
Let me dovetail with that, because I wanted to give a second part of this answer. That's not just about the work we do. The systemic things, because you talked about billionaires, media, corporate ownership of media. Actually, one of the most popular graphics I have online, which a lot of publishers have asked me to reprint in school textbooks, is a chart I made based on the different editions of Ben Bagdikian's Media Monopoly book. And when he came out with that, we have a page, corporations.org/media, that I have not updated in a long time, so probably a lot of broken links. But it has this chart on there that shows how in 1980, when he first wrote that book, there were 50 corporations that controlled all sorts of media. And by the time the most recent edition came out, I think it was 5, maybe 4 corporations controlling like almost all the media that's out there. So that media concentration is a big part of the problem. I see, Matt, you're wearing a Bernie t-shirt, right on. That kind of, well, okay. The corporate media is what made it impossible for Bernie to become our president. They did it 4 years ago. They gave him the least coverage and the most negative coverage. They deliberately pumped up Trump because they knew he was good for ratings. And the DNC and Clinton's campaign deliberately responded more to Trump before he was even catching on, so that he would be the one who wins the Republican nomination, because they thought he was the easiest to beat. And oops, they were wrong on that. So it was I can't say conspiracy, but because it was just their own self-interest. It wasn't necessarily a conspiracy.
Mike, you are preaching to the choir.
That is so us.
We are with you 100,000%, you thrash maniac. Keep thrashing.
It was just very deliberate what they did to make sure that we couldn't have a populist person that serves the people's interests. And they are doing it again this year. And there are specific things that we could be doing to democratize media, to democratize our electoral process and have an actual democracy. And I don't even like to frame it that way and say have a democracy, because democracy is not a form of government. Democracy is the level of success of a government in representing its people. It's not a light switch where it's on and off. It's not you have it or you don't, got democracy or not. We can be more or less democratic, and we are a lot less democratic than other countries. And we can redesign our election system one state at a time, one local government at a time, one mechanism at a time.
You probably should have your own show, because we can't fucking talk like you talk, and you're inspiring the crap out of me, and you should just stop it, because I don't want to go run and stop an incinerator.
That's why I said he's got to come back on.
Yeah, you're absolutely
Let
brilliant.
me just point to one thing. Another part of our corporations.org site, which is just a side project I run in my not so spare time. There's a section there called How to Overthrow Corporate Rule in 5 Not So Easy Steps. I used to do a workshop called that. And the second step is electoral and democracy. Click on that link. That is the one page I keep up to some degree. And you'll see stuff like ranked choice voting, public ownership of campaigns, all this stuff. I need to add things, all the stuff Greg Palast has been reporting on about voter theft and racist voter purging. But all these tactics that they're using to keep corporations running our government and Republicans using to keep anyone other than conservatives from voting even, have been eroding our democracy incredibly. And there are a lot of concrete tactics that people can do to make sure that we can have a more democratic government and have a better chance of getting good people running our government so we can win all the different issues that we're working on. And I'll just give the example of Maine. The day that Trump won in 2016, something else really good happened, and that was in the state of Maine. And you're nodding, you might know what I'm talking about here. There's a Tea Party governor who won the election 2 terms in a row with less than 50% of the vote. And he's been awful. But there were 3 minor parties, Green Party, Libertarian probably, and some other independent party, that got about 1% each. And that was enough to split the vote so that the Republican Tea Party guy got in a second time. And unlike at the national level, voters figured out, gee, maybe we should change how our election system works. And they became the first and only state still to have ranked choice voting, and had to go back to the ballot again and vote it in again and defend it in court to make sure that now people can rank their choices 1, 2, 3.
That's right.
So you can vote Ralph Nader first, or a socialist person, or a person who has no chance but actually has good values first. And it won't help elect the person you least want in the process. And that is one of many tactics that we need to do, so we don't have the liberal, neoliberal type people who are mainstream Democrats fighting the left and the Green Party and the Sanders people every 4 years to the death and losing Facebook friends over it, because we can at least solve that dysfunction in our system and enable better people to be able to get into elections.
And I wonder if it's the corporations who are not supporting the ranked choice voting bill on some level.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I was just curious, how could you see all this happening financially in the future? How could we make this a bigger thing for all communities, where we can actually go green, or we can implement the Green New Deal?
So the Green New Deal and all the other big policies that we're looking at, and as a reminder, the Green New Deal is not just the green part, it's single payer healthcare, Medicare for all, it's all the other things that are part of the left agenda are kind of wrapped up in that. So don't get hung up on thinking it's all an environmental or climate proposal. But yes, there are big price tags for all of those things, but there are also huge price tags for our military budget. We've been squandering huge amounts of money on our military budget, and we can cut that radically so that we don't have to have 800 military bases on other countries around the world. And we don't have to have death squads that we call Joint Special Operations Command in 75 countries. You know, we have a lot of money that we're spending that is basically to secure having a flow of cheap oil and other resources and cheap labor in other nations. And we don't need to be doing that if we get ourselves sustainable enough that we're not 4 to 5% of the global population using 25 to 30% of the world's resources, but actually get our consumption under control and stop having to use the military to abuse the rest of the world so that we can maintain the flow of those resources. Those resources financially going into the military are what can fund all the other stuff that we're talking about. And no one says, where's the money when we need $2 trillion? Was that how much it was for the coronavirus bailout? Or the 14.4 trillion of Obama stimulus package that went largely to big economic interests. So no one asks where's the money when it comes to that, but as soon as the people's needs are being met, it's like, oh, where's the money? That costs so much. But corporations have those bailouts available to them at all times. And so we need to be realistic about that. The money is there. It's just about fair taxation, making sure that the rich are paying their fair share, which obviously they're not, and making sure that we also change our economy in ways that maybe, I don't know what your MMT theory is about, but I'm going to guess that maybe you have a critique of this idea of endless economic growth on a finite planet. being something that really isn't impossible and doesn't make sense. And so having a steady state economy that is not based on infinite growth on a finite planet would make a lot of sense as well.
And so one of the things that MMT really goes into is that, you know, we are the creator of the dollar. We make the dollar. So, you know, whenever we need money, we just create more zeros in the account, pretty much is what happens. We make the money. It's not, funded. It's not tied to a gold standard anymore since 1971. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we really look at is that we are able to afford whatever we want to as long as our GDP is strong. So we can do these things. We can afford these things if we want to. But that's where we say, why can we afford to fund the military on such a high level? Why can we afford to all of a sudden, when we were saying we had such a high deficit, all of a sudden have all this, you know, trillions of dollars to be able to fund the coronavirus bill. So, and so that's where it's important to maybe understand MMT is what we look at.
One other thing I'd point out, and I think AOC and Sanders May pointed this out to some extent, is that the cost of not doing these things, especially when we're talking about climate change, but even healthcare and all sorts of things, the cost of not spending this money is far higher than spending this money to do the right thing.
That's right. Yep. They control the level of progressives that are allowed to come into the Congress because they know that that's going to change.
That's why Wall Street's putting money into defeating AOC, because she's a symbol that they can't stand.
That's right.
Not that they're trying to take out everyone. I'm sure they're probably trying to do that too, but they're deliberately going after her because she's the visible one that inspires other people. I have advised some candidates and people who are in office, not usually at the federal level, and there's a huge need for that, that kind of policy advising on a progressive side of things, because of course we know there's ALEC and these other formations on the right that are unifying corporate connected politicians to push all their agendas, and I think we definitely need something stronger on the left doing similar stuff.
Hi, this is Sarah from Real Progress in Action. We just finished with Planet of the Confused, Part 2 with Matt Ewall. And I just wanted to remind you guys to stay tuned for Part 3, which should be coming out very soon. Thank you so much.